Have you ever wondered what it truly means to serve the poor, not just with charity, but with dignity, love, and deep solidarity? At the heart of the Vatican, amid centuries of tradition and global attention, one event quietly and powerfully redefines the soul of the Catholic Church every year: the World Day of the Poor. And now Pope Leo XIV has taken the torch from Pope Francis and is carrying it with both reverence and bold new energy. Welcome, dear viewers. Today, I invite you on a profound journey through Vatican City's colonnades into the lives of the marginalized and into the heart of the man now continuing this sacred mission. This is not just about one day in the church calendar. This is about a way of life, a radical call, and a bold legacy being lived out in real time. Let's begin with how it all started. Pope Francis, known as the Pope of the Poor, established the World Day of the Poor in 2017. It was never meant to be just a symbolic event. He wanted it to be a wake-up call, a spiritual and societal reckoning for the Church and for every believer. Pope Francis declared that caring for the poor was not optional. It was essential. It was the gospel. He set the tone with a powerful message. Let us love, not with words, but with deeds. Year after year, he invited the poor to the Vatican, not just for aid or handouts, but for companionship, celebration, and visibility. There were meals served under the majestic Bernini colonnade. Medical tents were set up for those who couldn't afford treatment. Confessionals opened. Feet were washed. And more importantly, the Church listened. Francis didn't want the poor to be treated as problems to be solved, but as brothers and sisters to be embraced. Now enter Pope Leo XIV, a man deeply formed by Francis's theology of encounter and humility. From the moment he stepped into the papacy, Leo XIV made one thing clear: the legacy of serving the poor would not only continue, it would expand. This year's World Day of the Poor marked Pope Leo XIV's first as pontiff. Expectations were high. Skepticism, too. Could he really match the authenticity and tenderness of Francis? Would he understand the symbolic weight of this day? But Leo XIV didn't flinch. He arrived early that morning, before the sun had fully risen, clad in simple white robes and carrying a small wooden cross. No cameras. No press. Just silence. Reverence. He walked, unannounced, among the sleeping homeless encamped near St. Peter's Square. He knelt beside a man named Marco, who had lost everything to gambling and divorce, and simply listened. No sermons. No grandeur. Just presence. Word quickly spread. By mid-morning, the square was alive with volunteers, pilgrims, clergy, social workers. The Vatican's health clinic had reopened with expanded services, dental care, eye checks, blood pressure monitoring. For many of the poor in attendance, this was the only medical care they would receive all year. And when Pope Leo finally addressed the crowd, his voice, calm but firm, rang out across the square. Today, he said, is not a day to give thanks for what we have. It is a day to confess what we've withheld. When we hoard comfort while others sleep in rain, we sin not just against our neighbor, but against Christ himself. His homily was unlike anything the Curia expected. While maintaining doctrinal integrity, Leo XIV pushed boundaries. He spoke of systemic injustice, of global greed, of modern indifference that masquerades as efficiency. We must move from a church of proclamation to a church of participation, he declared. It is not enough to announce the gospel to the poor. We must live it with them. The crowd was silent. Then applause broke out, not polite clapping, but thunderous approval, especially from those who had been silenced by society for too long. He invoked the memory of Pope Francis with tenderness, calling him a prophetic grandfather who taught us that mercy is not weakness, but strength of the spirit. Later that day, Pope Leo XIV did something extraordinary. He insisted on eating his midday meal not with the cardinals or bishops, but seated at a long table under the colonnade, elbow to elbow with men and women experiencing homelessness. The menu was simple: bread, pasta, fruit, and bottled water. But the atmosphere was sacred. A woman named Anita wept as she described how she hadn't eaten a proper meal in 2 days. A young refugee from South Sudan named Daniel shared how he had fled war and now slept on church steps. Pope Leo listened to each story as if it were scripture. And then, with tears in his eyes, he stood and said, "This table is my altar today. And your lives, your scars, your courage, they are my sermon." This moment was more than symbolic. It was transformative. The message was unmistakable: you belong. You matter. You are not forgotten. Pope Leo didn't want this day to end in Rome. So, he launched a simultaneous initiative across 50 dioceses worldwide. In Mexico, parish halls turned into day shelters. In Kenya, mobile clinics offered vaccinations and counseling. In the Philippines, local priests cooked meals and washed feet. In France, bishops sat quietly in parks with migrants, all coordinated under a simple theme: until every voice is heard. What was once a single Vatican event under Pope Francis has now become a global liturgical mission under Pope Leo. He calls it an explosion of tenderness. One of the most stirring lines from Pope Leo's address came when he said, "The poor are not the Church's charity project, they are her heartbeat." He spoke of his own childhood, growing up in a family that struggled to make ends meet. His mother used to feed hungry neighbors before feeding herself. "I have known hunger," he said, "but I've also known the joy of sharing." Leo XIV made it personal. He made it real. And he challenged the global church not to see the poor as them, but as us. This wasn't performative. This was prophetic. In continuation of the day's message, Pope Leo XIV unveiled a bold new project: Tables of Mercy. This initiative will fund and support local parishes around the world to create permanent spaces for the poor, not just for meals, but for conversation, learning, and healing. These won't be soup kitchens. They'll be sacred spaces where the poor teach the Church how to be human again. He emphasized that these tables must not be staffed only by volunteers, but also by those who've experienced poverty themselves. "The poor do not just need help," he said. "They need platforms." As the sun set over Rome that evening, Pope Leo XIV remained in the square, long after the chairs had been folded and the crowds had gone home. He sat quietly on a bench with Marco, the man he met at dawn, sharing a pastry and watching the shadows of the colonnade stretch across the cobblestones. It was a quiet, holy ending to a powerful day, and it marked the beginning of something bigger, a renewed church, rooted not in buildings or doctrines alone, but in people, especially the ones society prefers to ignore. This is only the beginning. In the next part, we will explore the long-term global impact Pope Leo XIV hopes to achieve through these initiatives, and how his vision is reshaping the Church's identity from the inside out. Are you ready to go deeper? As the warm lights of St. Peter's Square dimmed after a historic day, the ripples of Pope Leo XIV's first World Day of the Poor were already being felt across continents. But this moment, powerful as it was not designed to be remembered as a one-day spectacle. It was meant to awaken a new era of how the Church lives and breathes the gospel. You see, Pope Leo understands something crucial. In today's noisy world, compassion alone is no longer enough. What we need is a transformation, a church that not only preaches mercy but becomes it. Let's take a closer look at how he's setting that transformation into motion. One of Pope Leo XIV's clearest goals is to move the Church beyond symbolic gestures into structural mercy. What does that mean? It means programs with permanence. It means policies that reflect Christ's radical care. It means budgets that prioritize the most vulnerable, not as an afterthought, but as the foundation. So immediately after the World Day of the Poor, Pope Leo met with key Vatican officials. No cameras. No applause. Just a whiteboard. And a clear mandate. I want a 5-year plan to embed the poor into the heart of our governance. This wasn't just lip service. Within days, the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development announced the appointment of 2 lay consultants, both of whom had once experienced homelessness. For the first time in Vatican history, those who had once slept under bridges were now seated at the tables shaping church policy. But it wasn't just actions that Pope Leo focused on. He knew language shapes hearts. So he began reshaping the church's vocabulary around poverty. He instructed homilists, catechists, and theologians to stop referring to the poor as beneficiaries, and instead call them collaborators. We do not minister to the poor, he said. We minister with them. This simple linguistic shift sent waves through seminaries and parishes alike. It forced a new question: are we actually walking with the poor? Or are we still standing above them? One of Pope Leo's boldest moves was launching a new annual event, the Vatican Listening Forum. And here's the twist: only the poor are invited to speak. No bishops. No ambassadors. No scholars. The first forum was held just weeks after the World Day of the Poor. In a large hall just beyond the Apostolic Palace, refugees, the disabled, the addicted, and the unemployed were given microphones and a platform. One speaker, Licia, a single mother from Venezuela, shared how she walked 800 miles with her children seeking safety and food. Another, Giovanni, a former prisoner, spoke of his conversion behind bars and how no parish would allow him to serve afterward. Each testimony was followed not by debate, but by silence. Deep, holy silence. Pope Leo listened with his hands folded, eyes wet, occasionally taking notes. He later said, "Today, I was taught the gospel again by its most faithful students. The Vatican is a place of art and symbolism. Statues stain glass, and frescoes tell stories of saints and heroes. But rarely, if ever, do they depict the poor in their dignity." So Pope Leo commissioned something unprecedented. A new fresco. One that would adorn the Apostolic Almoner's courtyard, a space visited by millions. But instead of angels or apostles, this fresco would feature the faces of the poor he met under the colonnade. A woman with a weathered smile. A boy with a scarred face but gentle eyes. A group of men praying over bread. It would be called the Forgotten Christ. Pope Leo insisted. Let our walls reflect not our pride, but our penitence. This act wasn't about decoration. It was about reorienting the Church's imagination, so that everyone who walked through the Vatican would be confronted not with power, but with love. Beyond public gestures, Pope Leo is targeting something much harder to change: clerical culture. He's calling out careerism among the clergy. He's discouraging the opulent lifestyle of bishops. He's issuing new directives that dioceses reduce spending on cathedrals and redirect funds to poverty alleviation projects. To set the tone, Pope Leo has refused to move into the lavish papal apartments. Instead, he remains in the Domus Sancti Marthi, just like Pope Francis did. But he's taken it a step further. He converted one wing of the residence into a transitional shelter for homeless families passing through Rome. He said, "If my house has empty rooms while children sleep outside, I have failed my master." Already bishops across the world are following suit. In Buenos Aires, a chancery office now doubles as a free law clinic. In Manila, an archbishop's residence hosts teen mothers and offers job training. In Poland, rectories have become literacy hubs. This isn't a trend. It's a tectonic shift. Pope Leo knows that the future of the Church lies in the hands of young people. And so, at a special World Youth Gathering the week after the World Day of the Poor, he addressed students and young adults directly. "You will be told to aim high," he said. "But I say aim low. Serve those at the bottom. That is where Jesus lives." He invited young Catholics to launch social projects, to use their degrees not just to make money, but to disrupt systems of poverty. He blessed a new app developed by theology students in Spain that connects local parishes to those needing meals or shelter. And he reminded them, the gospel doesn't go viral through clicks. It spreads when one hand takes another. What's especially unique about Pope Leo XIV's approach is his commitment to working beyond Catholicism. He believes the fight against poverty is too important for theological division. So he extended invitations to leaders of other faiths, Muslims, Protestants, Jews, Buddhists, Hindus, to join in a week of solidarity following the World Day of the Poor. The result was unprecedented. An imam and a rabbi served meals side by side in a Rome shelter. A Buddhist monk joined a group of nuns to distribute hygiene kits. An evangelical pastor and a Catholic priest prayed together with homeless migrants in front of the Pantheon. Pope Leo said afterward, "When we feed the hungry together, we prove that God is not divided. And the ripple effects are just beginning." In Nigeria, a parish launched a vocational center funded through the Vatican's new Tables of Mercy initiative. Young women are learning tailoring, baking, and digital skills. In Argentina, a diocesan seminary opened its grounds to build a garden tended by street children, with fresh produce donated to local families. In Canada, a bishop auctioned off church-owned land to fund shelters and scholarships for indigenous communities. Each of these actions was inspired by a single day and a single voice. Leo XIV's reminder that mercy is not seasonal. It's sacramental. But not everyone is thrilled. Some in the Curia worry that Pope Leo is moving too fast, too radically, too far from tradition. Critics say his focus on poverty risks ignoring doctrine. That the Church is a place of eternal truths, not social experiments. To them, Pope Leo responds not with anger, but clarity. The truth of Christ is not endangered by love. It is fulfilled by it. He points to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25. "I was hungry, and you gave me food." And then he says simply, "This is my orthodoxy." As this new chapter unfolds, one thing becomes clear. Pope Leo XIV is not just preserving Pope Francis's legacy, he's amplifying it. He's translating it into systems, art, policy, and language. He's challenging every diocese, every bishop, every believer. And yes, he's challenging you and me. Because the World Day of the Poor is not just for popes and priests. It's a call to action for each of us, to ask uncomfortable questions, Who are the poor in my life? What comfort have I refused to share? Whose story have I ignored? As Pope Leo often says, the poor evangelize us, if we let them. In Part 3, we'll explore how the media and public have responded to these sweeping changes, and how Pope Leo XIV plans to embed this mission deeper into the Church's future through education, liturgy, and global partnerships. Stay with me. So far, we've followed Pope Leo XIV as he's honored and expanded Pope Francis's vision of the World Day of the Poor, transforming it from a one-day event into a movement, a mission, and a mirror that reflects the Church's truest values. But here's what you might not expect: the world is watching. The media, the public, faithful and secular alike. And the response? It's not what some predicted. Let's dive into the ripple effects this bold shift has caused, both in the press and in the pews, and explore how Pope Leo plans to anchor this mission into the very bones of the Church. At first, many global media outlets approached Pope Leo's World Day of the Poor with caution. After all, he was relatively new to the papacy, following a beloved predecessor. Headlines read, "Can Leo live up to Francis?" and "A new pontiff, same priorities." But by the end of the event, those headlines changed. CNN featured a segment titled, "The Pope Who Eats with the Homeless." BBC ran a piece called, "Pope Leo's First Major Legacy Moment." Even skeptical outlets like the Wall Street Journal noted that his emphasis on structural reform within the Vatican was bold, practical, and long overdue. But perhaps the most powerful image circulated wasn't one taken by a journalist, it was a cell phone photo. A candid snapshot of Pope Leo, sitting on the cobblestones, sharing a sandwich with an elderly beggar. No caption. No lighting. Just raw humanity. That photo went viral. And suddenly, people who hadn't followed church news in years were paying attention. Among everyday Catholics, the responses varied, but most were deeply moved. In New York, a parish youth group held a vigil to pray for the poor and raised funds for a local shelter. Their inspiration? Pope Leo's homily. In Brazil, a bishop confessed in a live-streamed mass that he had grown too comfortable in his role, and that Leo's actions reignited my priesthood. In Manila, a group of laypeople started a campaign called "A Chair at Our Table," encouraging families to set an extra plate at dinner once a week to remember and pray for the hungry. But it wasn't just inspiration that spread. It was discomfort too. Some churchgoers, used to a more traditional and quiet faith, felt challenged. One woman in Italy said, "It's beautiful, but is it too political?" A priest in Spain confessed, "I was trained to preach doctrine, not organize clinics. I feel inadequate." Pope Leo anticipated this. And that's why his next move wasn't to push harder. It was to teach. Within weeks of the World Day of the Poor, Pope Leo XIV met with leaders of Catholic universities, seminaries, and catechetical offices. His message was clear. We need a new curriculum, one that includes the poor not as case studies, but as co-authors. He commissioned the Vatican Education Office to develop new materials called the Gospel of the Least. These would include real stories from the poor, written in collaboration with theologians, modules on economic justice, homelessness, and dignity, reflections from saints who lived in solidarity with the poor, from St. Francis to Mother Teresa, pastoral training for priests that includes internships in shelters and clinics. Already, pilot programs have launched in Nigeria, France, the Philippines, and the U.S. Theologians are calling it the most significant shift in pastoral formation in decades. One professor put it bluntly. We used to teach theology from the top down. Pope Leo is flipping the classroom. Pope Leo understands that transformation isn't just intellectual, it's liturgical. So he's begun encouraging dioceses to adapt the Mass in a way that reflects the presence of the poor. He's asked that parishes include prayers of the faithful written by the poor, that lectors and Eucharistic ministers include those from disadvantaged backgrounds. He even approved a special liturgy for the World Day of the Poor, itself called the Mass of the Broken Bread. The readings are taken from Isaiah, James, and Matthew 25. The homily is replaced by a testimony from someone who has lived poverty. The offertory includes not just bread and wine, but symbolic offerings, a worn-out shoe, a medical bill, a rosary from a refugee. One cardinal said, "It is the most raw, honest, and humbling liturgy I've ever experienced." And Pope Leo? He says, "We cannot say this is my body if we ignore the broken bodies of Christ outside our doors." While Pope Leo XIV is careful not to align the Church with any one political party or ideology, his message has stirred debates in political arenas across the globe. In Italy, lawmakers debated the Pope's call to expand housing initiatives. Some called it overreach. Others cited it as moral urgency. In the U.S., Catholic politicians, both Democrat and Republican, were asked whether they support Pope Leo's tables of mercy idea. The responses varied, but the conversation had begun. In Latin America, leaders of several nations cited Pope Leo's actions when proposing new healthcare subsidies for the poor. When asked whether his mission was political, Pope Leo responded with characteristic clarity, "If politics means shaping how we live together, then yes, the gospel is political. But it is never partisan. It is always personal. Because Christ died not for systems, but for souls." A major development following the World Day of the Poor was Pope Leo's outreach to NGOs, humanitarian agencies, and even corporate leaders. He invited them not to donate, but to partner. He formed what he calls the Communion Table, a coalition of global organizations that agree to align their efforts with the Church's moral framework and respect the dignity of those they serve. Already, several major pharmaceutical companies have committed to providing free medication for the Vatican's mobile clinics. A tech firm is building an AI-powered logistics platform to distribute food more effectively through church networks in Africa. But the most poetic move? Pope Leo named a group of formerly homeless men and women as the ambassadors of mercy. Their job is to travel the world, share their stories, and help negotiate new church partnerships. These are not trained diplomats. But in Pope Leo's eyes they represent the truest diplomacy, vulnerability, honesty, and hope. Of course, there's internal tension. A few bishops have resisted. One even accused Pope Leo of reducing the Church to a charity NGO. In response, Leo quoted St. John Chrysostom, "If you cannot find Christ in the beggar at the door, you will not find him in the chalice." Some wealthy donors have pulled back. Certain parishes have been slow to implement the changes. But Pope Leo is not discouraged. He told one cardinal, "Reform is not the fruit of popularity. It is the fruit of fidelity." And so, he continues, Pope Leo's vision is not a flash of inspiration. It's a blueprint. A rebuilding from below. He dreams of a church where every parish has a table of mercy, a permanent poor advisory team, ongoing formation that includes lived experience, a weekly fast, not of food, but of excess, to fund those in need. He envisions schools where theology students spend as much time in shelters as they do in libraries. He calls for canonization causes for laypeople who lived and died in poverty while radiating Christ. He even dreams of a new Vatican Council, not to reform doctrine, but to reform direction. A global synod centered on what the poor ask of the Church. He knows he won't see all of it in his lifetime. But he says, "My job is not to finish the cathedral. It's to lay a stone that others will build upon." So here we are, witnesses not just to a tradition, but to a turning point. Pope Francis ignited a flame. Pope Leo XIV is stoking it into a wildfire of mercy, justice, and love. And this legacy is no longer just a papal idea. It is becoming the Church's lifeblood. Because the truth is simple and terrifying. If we do not become a church of the poor, we will become a church of irrelevance. But Pope Leo refuses to let that happen. He's not only keeping the mission alive, he's multiplying it. In Part 4, we'll explore the personal faith of Pope Leo XIV, the prayers he prays, the saints who guide him, and the deeply spiritual convictions that fuel his mission to serve the least of these. You won't want to miss it. We've walked with Pope Leo XIV through his bold transformation of the World Day of the Poor, tracing its ripple effect from Vatican City to communities worldwide. We've seen how he elevated the legacy of Pope Francis from a symbolic celebration into a global mission of mercy. But behind every revolution is a soul, a prayer life, a quiet place from which all great actions begin. To fully understand how Pope Leo XIV has become the shepherd of the poor, we must look not just at his policies, but at his heart. Today, we pull back the curtain and explore the deeply personal side of Pope Leo, the faith, the rituals, and the unseen moments that drive this extraordinary pontificate. Before any public speech, before any papal meeting or mass, Pope Leo XIV begins his day the same way. In silence. He rises before dawn, makes his way to a small private chapel tucked away within Domus Sancti Marthi, and kneels before the Eucharist. There is no entourage, no photographers, just a simple wooden kneeler and a flickering candle. He often carries a small, worn prayer book his mother gave him as a child. The pages are dog-eared. The ink is smudged. But to him it's a lifeline. One Vatican staff member shared. You can hear him whispering names, not of cardinals or kings, but of people he's met. The woman in the wheelchair. The boy who slept in his arms. He prays for them by name. This isn't public theater. It's the hidden root from which all his public fruits grow. Ask Pope Leo what scripture shapes his mission, and he'll respond instantly, Isaiah 58. It's not the typical papal choice. No triumphant psalm. No regal gospel verse. Instead it reads, Is not this the fast I choose, to loose the chains of injustice, to set the oppressed free, to share your food with the hungry, and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? He once said in a homily. If this were the only page of scripture we had, it would be enough to build a church on. He asks every bishop he appoints to memorize that chapter. Not as a test, but as a compass. Pope Leo doesn't surround himself with portraits of past popes. His office walls bear images of 4 very specific saints. Saint Oscar Romero, the Salvadoran archbishop assassinated for defending the poor. Leo calls him a bishop who walked like Christ, with dirt on his sandals. Saint Josephine Bakhita, the Sudanese former slave turned nun. He sees her as a prophet of dignity, and often asks her intercession for trafficked women and children. Saint Francis of Assisi, the original reformer who embraced poverty, Leo models much of his own simplicity on Francis's life, even keeping only one pair of papal shoes. Blessed Carlo Acutis, the teenage tech-savvy saint. Leo sees him as a bridge to youth, and often quotes Carlo's line, "We're all born originals, but many die as photocopies." This blend of saints, poor, persecuted, young, and revolutionary, shapes the lens through which Pope Leo sees the world. While mornings begin in silence, his nights end in humility. Before bed, Pope Leo XIV performs a private ritual. He washes his hands not as hygiene but as prayer. He places a bowl on his desk, pours cool water, and whispers, "Lord, forgive the harm I did today, the good I failed to do. Cleanse me, so I may love again tomorrow." It's a personal echo of Jesus washing the disciples' feet. But for Leo, the hands matter. They write encyclicals. They bless. They hold the poor. He once told a friend, "These hands carry souls. They must never forget their dirt." Pope Leo doesn't see the poor as a burden on society. He sees them as a mirror. "When we meet the poor," he said in a recent interview, "we don't just encounter need. We encounter truth about ourselves, our greed, our fears, and our illusions." He believes the poor hold up a mirror to the Church. Are we who we claim to be? Are we really servants? Are we building walls or breaking them? And he doesn't exclude himself from this interrogation. At one press conference, he said, "If I ever use my title to ignore suffering, I hope the world holds me accountable." Pope Leo XIV knows he will not reign forever. But his dream is not to be remembered. It's to be multiplied. He dreams that the next generation of priests won't ask, "What vestments should I wear?" but rather, "Whose wounds am I called to touch?" He dreams of bishops who choose bicycles over black cars. He dreams of nuns who run podcasts for the voiceless. Of Catholic schools where theology books are stained with soup from homeless shelters. And most of all, he dreams of a church where the poor don't feel like guests, but like family. Though Pope Francis now lives in retirement, far from the spotlight, he and Pope Leo maintain a deep, regular connection. Every Sunday evening, they speak by phone. Leo often begins by saying, "Bless me, Papa Francesco." And Francis always replies, "Only if you keep feeding the sheep." They joke. They pray. They reflect. And sometimes they weep. Especially when they talk about how the Church is still tempted to chase relevance rather than righteousness. Pope Leo once said, "Pope Francis showed me the path. I simply want to walk it until my legs give out." But make no mistake, this Pope does not sugarcoat his message. In his most recent World Day of the Poor address, he issued a sobering warning. If the Church forgets the poor, it forgets Christ. If we preach about heaven while ignoring hells on earth, our gospel becomes hollow. The poor are not a mission field. They are our judges. He added, "I am not interested in how many come to our churches. I want to know how many are missed when they leave." These words are not designed to attract applause. They are meant to unsettle, to wake us up. Let me leave you with a story, one that few know. Weeks before the World Day of the Poor, Pope Leo secretly visited a hospice for terminally ill homeless people in Rome. There, he met an elderly man named Davide, once a musician, now dying of liver failure. The man asked only one thing. "Will you eat with me? Just once?" And so they did. Bread, soup, a little wine. No robes. No titles. Just two men. Two children of God. Davide said, "I thought I'd die forgotten. But now I'll die seen." 2 days later, Davide passed away. His last words reportedly were, "Tell the Pope, Thank you for coming low. And that, dear friends, is what this legacy is about. It is not a strategy. It is not an event. It is a way of being, a revolution that begins in the soul and spills out into the street. Pope Leo XIV has not simply carried on Pope Francis's mission. He has embodied it, elevated it, and invited every one of us to do the same. So I leave you with this question. Who is your Davide? Who in your life is waiting to be seen? To be fed? To be held? You don't have to be a pope. You just have to show up. With love. With humility. With mercy. Because in the words of Pope Leo XIV, the church that kneels with the poor will rise with Christ. Amen.